evening, peoples. Welcome back to my living room with me and Gingersnap here, and my BDB, because it's just my favorite book to dig into. It's the lexicon of Hebrew words in the Bible. So I thought we would do some fun things tonight, since the last couple weeks got a little bit heavy with the depressing statistics and such and whatnot. So anyway, I want to talk about dragons and unicorns and phoenixes because they're cool. And I was kind of thinking recently about faith and fiction and their overlap, and how some fictional characters have really inspired people in their faith. And I think that's just really interesting play there. So dragons are very fun with the fire breathing and then the wings and the eating of things. And anyway, dragons are great. So one of my more fun sermons that I've preached, I think was a week or two after my first Christmas here. And I was talking about dragons and mystery and the unknown, because depending on which translation of the Bible you are reading, there are dragons in it, in the Psalms, but also in Genesis, and like more uses of this word that can be translated as dragons than I had realized before this afternoon. So that's cool. Yeah, so the word for dragons comes up, for example, in the very first book of Genesis. So our translation of the Bible reads, "So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good." So the word translated as great sea monsters could also be translated perfectly viably as dragons, which is interesting. Then in Exodus, and I love this one, God is talking to Moses and says, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Perform a wonder,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake,'" in our translation, but that word could also be translated as dragon. So that's pretty nifty. I mean, if you're performing a miracle to turn a staff into something that is else, I mean, you might as well make a dragon, honestly. I mean, God has, why not? That would be very impressive. So this one is a bit more metaphorical. In Deuteronomy 32, talking about people of no faith, who are of enemy nations. "Their vine comes from the vine stock of Sodom, from the vineyards of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of poison." That's a great line. "Their grapes are grapes of poison. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents, the cruel venom of asps." So clearly this is a metaphorical kind of language. It's not that they're literally drinking poisoned wine. That would be a very silly thing for them to do. But because they are people who don't believe in God, because of the lifestyle and the practices that they have, and the way that they live, everything within them has kind of become twisted, and not the way things are supposed to be. And so even the wine that they make is poisonous enough to be able to kill serpents or dragons or asps. So it's a little bit melodramatic, honestly, but it's great poetry. And so used there as more of a metaphor, I think. You could have used dragon if you wanted to, but I am not a Bible translator. Job, the book of Job, is a rather lengthy book. It's more of a philosophical exercise. It's not a recounting of actual events. It's more a philosopher thinking of, well, what if terrible things happened to a person who was good? Why would that be? How does that happen in the universe? So it's an extended conversation about why do bad things happen to good people, basically. So within the book, there's a lot of people who chime in with different viewpoints. It's really kind of a philosophy kind of thing. But because it's not a literal history, they can have a bit more creativity, I suppose. And so In one of the lines in chapter 30, Job says, "My inward parts are in turmoil and are never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go about in sunless gloom. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black and falls from me, and my bones burn with heat. My lyre is tuned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep." Gorgeous, gorgeous poetry throughout Job. So this particular translation, and again, I am not a Hebrew scholar. I am not a Bible translator. I barely passed Hebrew, to be honest. It's very complicated language. And anyway, so I'm not sure how the word that can be translated for dragons became jackals here. Because jackals they're kind of like a dog-looking, foxy predator, carnivore in the desert. So I'm not entirely sure how we got there, but it's this image of Job being out in the desert, just bleached white with the sun, but his skin is turning black and falling off of him. And although the dichotomy of kind of a desert imagery with sunless gloom is interesting, but the lyre is tuned to mourning, and it's just bad times all around, in short. But Job could be saying, "I am a brother of dragons," if we wanted him to. So another more metaphorical use of this word in Jeremiah 51, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon has devoured me. He has crushed me. He has made me an empty vessel. He has swallowed me like a monster. He has filled his belly with my delicacies. He has spewed me out. So there, of course, monster is, I think, less fun than dragon. Maybe the point is not necessarily what does Pastor Leia specifically think would be the most fun way to translate a verse. To get the image across, maybe monster is better. But it's so great. Like King Nebuchadnezzar is so oppressive that he has swallowed me, and what brings me joy and my freedom he has swallowed like a monster, which is delightful. So I believe that the dragon sermon that I preached a couple years ago was on Psalm 148. There's a couple psalms that have this line in it. So praise the Lord from the earth, you sea monsters and all deeps. And it's just this gorgeous imagery of everything in creation, not just the people, but all of the animals and the plants, and just everything is singing praise to God in their own way, which is delightful. So of course in our Bible it is translated as sea monsters, but in the King James Version in particular, the older one, it would use dragons. So I actually grabbed my NKJV this afternoon to see if some of these dragon verses kept the dragon, and they don't seem to, which is a bit of a bummer to me. But again, the point in translating the Bible is not what would Pastor Leia think is the most fun way to do this, but maybe what is the most accurate to the text and what would communicate the most meaning to, people who are not me. So I looked up this word in my BDB that I stuck a bunch of sticky notes in. So the word is tenin in the Hebrew, and this is like the definitive dictionary, basically, of the Hebrew words in the Bible. And so it says serpent, dragon, sea monster, in that order. Dragon comes before sea monster. Also just monster generally, mythological personification of chaos. So just sort of a sense of just chaos and giant and unknown and mystery, but I think that dragon kind of communicates that pretty well. Kind of as a fun fact, with some etymology, as I was briefly Googling this afternoon, the word for dragon is literally huge serpent from Greek roots. So technically, the word dragon doesn't necessarily mean, monster of myth with the fire breathing. It could just be a very large, snake or whatever. If you wanted to refer to a cobra as a dragon, I guess technically you could. I mean, I'm not sure people would understand what you meant by using the word in that way, but I mean, technically. But also, interestingly, and this is rather unrelated, the word dinosaur, also from Greek roots, just means terrible lizard. Also, did not realize that the word was only coined in 1841, so that's a fun fact. But I mean, technically, you know, if I knew somebody who had a chameleon, who was kind of a jerk of a chameleon and was prone to biting my finger, I could technically call that a dinosaur because that would be a terrible lizard. That wasn't even a funny joke. Don't bother pretending to laugh. Anyway, and then the word serpent is from a Latin root that means creeping. So that's just kind of some fun interplay of words there. So, the unicorns. One of my seminary colleagues will just go on joyfully for several minutes about the unicorn in the Bible, which is a pure delight. Of course, the word unicorn only literally means single horn from Latin roots. So technically, a narwhal is a unicorn. It's just got the uni of the horn, you know? It's technically... narwhals are the unicorns of the sea, of course. So in the book of Numbers, chapter 23, we read, God who brings them out of Egypt is like the horns of a wild ox for them. But you could translate the horns of a unicorn. I mean, if you're describing God, honestly, I kind of like the idea of God being powerful, and we don't have real ways to describe that. And so we have to turn to mythological beasts to get anywhere close to describing God. I kind of like that personally. Maybe that would be distracting in context for most people. I don't know. I like the image. So again, in Job, because Job is just full of these fun creatures, is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will it spend the night at your crib? Can you tie it in the furrow with ropes, or will it harrow the valleys after you? So again, this word could be translated is the unicorn willing to serve you. Can you tie the unicorn in the furrow with ropes? So that's kind of cool. And then even in the Psalms, in Psalm 92, there's a line, but you have exalted my horn like that of the wild ox or unicorn. You have poured over me fresh oil. So this word in the Hebrew is re'aim. It's this sticky note. And boringly, the BDB translates it as wild ox, which is just no fun at all. Again, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, and I'm definitely not an expert in like animals of the world, but I can certainly imagine that if you're trying to translate a word into a region where the animal originally described doesn't exist, then you might try to describe it as something similar. I have a friend who grew up as the child of missionaries in Africa doing a Bible translation. And one of the tricky things they encountered was how do you translate grapes to a culture that doesn't have grapes? Do you just like choose a similar fruit, or the kind of thing that can be fermented into alcohol? Or like how do you do that? I mean, grapes are always there, you know, it's hard to think of grapes not being there, if you know what I mean. But, you know, some cultural things might not translate as well. So it's entirely possible that at some point in our linguistic history, more people could understand the image of a unicorn than could understand the image of a specific kind of wild ox. So this one I just learned about today, and I might have to bug some Hebrew scholars that I do know, because I'm very curious how this happened. I did not realize there was a phoenix in the Bible. Well, I say in the Bible, but specifically it's actually in our Bible. The NRSV, the translation we usually use, is the New Revised Standard Version, translates this word as phoenix, when many other translations use the word sand. And I don't know how you get from sand to phoenix. But, so in our Bible, there's a line in Job 29, then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days like the phoenix. So a phoenix is kind of a fairly immortal bird. When it comes to the end of one life cycle, it kind of bursts into flames and then is reborn from the ashes, which is some imagery that has been used throughout Christian history, kind of to talk about immortality and being reborn and resurrected. And so Jesus might be portrayed with some phoenixes hanging out with him. And there's a bunch of other birds that have interesting symbolism that maybe isn't necessarily how the birds work in real life, but it's the kind of symbolic language that they've gotten. So I shall multiply my days like the phoenix is kind of living forever and starting over, which pairs well with I shall die in my nest. But the word whole, which is, which sticky note is you? There's so many sticky notes in this book. Yeah, it's BDB just has sand, but maybe more specifically like sand in the wind, whirling. Yeah, there is lower down a sense of birds, numberlessness, vastness, sand of a seashore. I don't know how we got to Phoenix, but I think that's a fun fact that there's a phoenix in the Bible, arguably, depending on what you read. So some perhaps more classic biblical beasts that do keep themselves in most Bibles would be the behemoth and the leviathan. So a behemoth, as it's used in modern English, is like kind of a really big animal. So people argue that it is a hippopotamus, or like an elephant, or just like something really big that, I mean, honestly, if I met a very large animal in the wild, I would not want to get close enough to it to be able to describe it in immense detail in my writings later on, because I would prefer not to be eaten by a large wild animal. But again, it is in Job where the point is not a literal thing that happened, it's a philosophical consideration of things. So in Job 40 we read, "Look at behemoth, which I made just as I made you." This is God talking. "It eats grass like an ox. Its strength is in its loins, and its power in the muscles of its belly. It makes its tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are knit together. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs like bars of iron. It is the first of the great acts of God. Only its maker can approach it with the sword. For the mountains yield food for it, where all the wild animals play. Under the lotus plants it lies, in the covert of the reeds and in the marsh, the lotus trees cover it for shade. The willows of the wadis surround it. Even if the river is turbulent, it is not frightened. It is confident, though Jordan rushes against its mouth. Can one take it with hooks or pierce its nose with a snare?" So it's kind of emphasizing God's power, that God is so great, that God could create an animal that only God could kill, something with a tail like a tree, and that is just vast and eating mountains. So let's see, that's gonna be this sticky note. I've also got smaller sticky notes for each letter. So behemoth, for example, hippopotamus is what is translated here, which is interesting, and definitely I think loses out on some of the poetry and the mystery if you're describing a hippopotamus as being something that only God could kill. The point is more that this massive beast that seems impossible, that God can do even what is impossible, is more the imagery that we're going for here. There are some people who really want to insist that the behemoth is a dinosaur. That's a thing that people will argue. Yeah. Anyway, so the Hebrew is behemah, so behemoth is fairly close to the pronunciation. So then the leviathan is a great creature of sea myths. Sea monsters and the Kraken and Davy Jones and all sorts of sea tales. I grew up by the ocean, can you tell? And again, it's always Job. It's always Job. And I totally had vague, I don't know why I thought Leviathan showed up more places, but apparently not. Behemoth and Leviathan are mostly in Job. So in Job 41, we read, "Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? or press down its tongue with a cord? This is still God talking. Can you put a rope in its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make many supplications to you? Will it speak soft words to you? Will it make a covenant with you to be taken as your servant forever? Will you play with it as with a bird? Or will you put it on a leash for your girls? Will traders bargain over it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its skin with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? Lay hands on it. Think of the battle. You will not do it again. Any hope of capturing it will be disappointed. Were not even the gods overwhelmed at the sight of it? No one is so fierce as to dare to stir it up. Who can stand before it? Who can confront it and be safe? Under the whole heaven, who? So it's just delightful. This is like the most terrifying creature on, I was going to say on the earth, but in the seas. So just nobody can like capture this thing. Nets aren't big enough to catch it. And even if you fill its whole head with fishing spears, still you would not defeat it. It's hard to think of anything surviving having any number of fishing spears in its head, let alone fishing spears plural. I mean, I would think a spear to the head would kill about anything, but what do I know? So this word, leviathan, let's see. It's more, it can be translated as serpent, dragon, or leviathan. So again, we have another dragon. We could perfectly legitimately be talking about a sea dragon. And I think that would be a completely valid way to talk about this, because the point is God's power is so great that God could create something like this. Yeah, so it's it might be a foreign loan word. So maybe this is an idea from somebody else's mythology that kind of got brought in as something that isn't real, but if God wanted to, God could make it real. So are we coming back up, or are we just meowing? I just fed her before this. So anyway, I think it is really cool that there are things about the Bible that we don't know, which kind of sounds like a weird thing to say, but I find it very comforting that there are things in the universe that are unknown, because I don't think the human mind is really capable of fully grasping how big God is. And to begin to come close, we try to work words around God and doesn't quite get there. But nobody has all of the answers, and so we can't be expected to know everything. I find that reassuring. I certainly don't know everything. Maybe Gingersnap thinks that she does, but that's cats for you. Cats and their egos. They remember when humans worshipped them as gods in Egypt. They have not forgotten. They consider us apostate. Apostate as having later left the faith. Some other words. Yeah, so I mean, there are many questions that people have had about the Bible through the years. I'm sure most people could come up with some questions. I would probably have more than most people because I have read chunks of it in the Greek and Hebrew, and I have questions. So many questions. But anyway, so I just thought it would be fun to look at the dragons and unicorns, because dragons and unicorns are fun unless the dragon is trying to eat you. I suppose that would not be fun, but fortunately they're not real, so I think we're safe anyway. But just the ways that sometimes we've had to resort to fictional beasts of mythology in order to get anywhere close to describing how immense and powerful and great and mysterious God is. So anyway, I thought that would be fun. So good night from me and Gingersnap, who has finally settled down, and now I'm bugging her so that she will wave to you. So I hope to see some of you tomorrow night for our Wednesday evening prayer. I will continue streaming those for a bit longer in our transition back to in-person worship on Sunday. So there will still be online offerings as well. And we'll still be doing a virtual cocktail hour on Thursday afternoon for anyone who would like to join. So friends, I hope that you are experiencing some magicalness in the world in the good way, not any dragons eating you kind of way. And so until we see you again, good night.